In episode 2 of Barnebys podcast, Eye of the Beholder, we travelled back in time after Banksy shocked the art world in the middle of an ongoing auction with what is probably one of the world's most talked about art coup of all time. Since then, a lot has happened with the interest in street art in general and Banksy specifically. In today's episode, we talk to Danny Herbert, collector of street art and head of the Department of Urban and Contemporary Art at Tate Ward. We also do visit to Sotheby's, while Alex Bransick, Senior Director and Head of Contemporary Art in Europe, and his team hang Banksy's masterpiece, Girl with a Balloon. This time, shredded and with the new title, Love is in the Bin, and with a 4 times higher estimate than the previous final price. Welcome to today's episode, Shredded. Less is more. What would you say is the thrill about the street and urban art? I mean, what makes it so interesting?
I think it's the newest. When I say the newest, it's a new art movement. Obviously, you know, we have contemporary art. You know, contemporary art has been born out of post-war art and abstract expressionism, pop art. You know, these movements have come before, and in a way, you know, for me, I think there's a little bit of a challenge, really. You know, how do you differentiate what the next art movement will be after contemporary art? So, you know, when I hear there's a category of ultra contemporary, and you know, I hear that thrown around, but you know, kind of for me, it's I find that a little confusing to kind of say, you know, it's immediately very different from contemporary art. So, so I think that's in a way a little bit of an interesting question. What you know, how will we know what the next art movement is? But street and urban art is definitely a departure from certainly a lot of the practices of contemporary artists, and I think it's so easy for people to interact with it because it's in, you know, often it's in their urban, you know, as they walk past it, you know, they see it, they, you know, and they enjoy it. And for a lot of people, maybe a lot of people outside, you know, traditional art collectors, art appreciators, it's a new thing to them. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say, well, that is the next art movement, and you know, but you know, the world we live in has changed hugely over the last 30, 40, 50 years, you know, with technology, and yeah, you know, you know, when does graffiti become art? You know, when there's an artistic element to it, a mural, you know, as opposed to someone spraying, you know, their tag on something, you know, and not that you know, them taking ownership of a space. So, so yeah, it's.
But is it always about what you want to say with their art? I mean, with their expression, or?
I suppose the proponents of street and urban art tend to be younger voices. They're kind of, they can express themselves always, not necessarily always in a legal way, but they can express themselves very easily, and they can get their message out to a huge, wide audience via Instagram, you know, the internet, but primarily Instagram. You know, the art world has obviously adopted Instagram as its kind of social media outlet. So I think that, you know, that's a huge disruption in the normal scheme of, you know, going to art college and being, you know, graduating from Goldsmiths, from Royal Academy or somewhere like that, having a graduate show, being spotted by, you know, a bigger gallery. You know, that it's definitely been disrupted, like all parts of our life. So, so yeah.
Yeah. From the how do you say, like the authorities' point of view?
Yeah.
The artists are often seen as activists or even criminals.
Sure.
But how has that changed due to the prices and attention they had on the secondary market?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? You know, now previously, and certainly when Banksy as a name to say, but as people's star rises, people are more of a mind to want to keep their graffiti and preserve it, and they feel that there is a cultural importance to it. Obviously, people seem to assign a higher value when there is a higher price of that artwork. And I suppose that's an interesting question. Just because an artwork's expensive, is it valuable? Exactly. Is it does the value of the artwork tie to its importance?
Yeah.
I think Damien Hirst's kind of like a good person to whose artwork addresses that question. Putting 14 million pounds worth of diamonds into encrusting them into a skull, and then putting a price of 150 million on it. That's an interesting conversation. How it then was bought, if it was bought by a consortium, was he part of that consortium? And right up till now with his newest kind of like NFT project, I think that's he's someone who's looked at money and value and cultural importance in a certainly in an interesting way. But with regard to graffiti, it's difficult. Councils in the past will be spraying, spraying to remove stuff, and then some stuff maybe they're removing, and other stuff they want to keep and preserve. It's kind of, should they be the arbiters of taste for public spaces? But then, if you paint illegally on a space that, and I suppose artists, obviously, maybe not a conscious decision. Maybe they don't necessarily have access to walls in the public space easily. Certainly, when you're at a lower level, it's harder to get that space. But placement can often be the most key point. They would rather. I know that this piece works within this context of this area, so I want to do it. If I have to paint it illegally, I'm going to paint it illegally because the piece in another space loses that context and hasn't, loses the impact of the piece. And would I rather paint something with bigger impact that I think, artists, especially, graffiti artists, they know that, the nature of their art can often be ephemeral. It's not going to be there forever. There's and for for people who follow street art, yes, photos can be taken, it can be preserved in that way. But for a lot of people, they want to come and see the piece. And not just by Banksy. There are other names that Invaders are. Someone who has kind of had huge impact in lots of different locations all over the world, and his stuff is instantly recognisable. And he's actually tied it to a kind of there's an app that you take pictures of his pieces that then kind of like, right, you've spotted one, so it's almost like not a train. To say it's train spotting is a little bit of an analogy there, but and so people then. He goes to a certain city or place, he invades it, and then people will then go and take the pictures and flash. And there's actually like a leaderboard of how many invader pieces have you seen in the world, and it's a kind of a kind of cool way to interact on that level. With your audience, exactly. There's obviously a competitive element to some. Some people they want to see as many as they can. It's.
But what about do they? I mean, do the street artists see themselves as artists, or are they like I don't know, poetry or?
Maybe they're creative. They're choreographers. I think they're just people who people with voices who want to express it, and they're choosing to express it publicly. Is it any different to someone who writes a blog? Yes, they're. I suppose it's the legality side of it. Once someone crosses that line of what is and isn't legal, their message can be lost sometimes. People can, or you'll lose a certain part of your audience of they won't view it in the same way because it's in that context. But yeah, you know, I even as a street art collector and someone who loves it, yeah, you know, I suppose I can be a little bit conflicted as to, you know, what is my personal preference. You know, do I want to see? You know, I don't want to see property being mindlessly vandalised, and I suppose, yeah, you know, again, it's, you know, it's that question of, well, when is it vandalism and when is it art? When, you know, and maybe the content of the message says that, but then just because someone's got a message and they paint it in a you know, maybe a more technically adept manner than the guy who scribbles his name somewhere. It's you know, I suppose it's another interesting it's another interesting question. And again, maybe it goes back to, you know, will this guy be selling his stuff for more money? Is there a, you know, I think I try to just judge things on, you know, my immediate reaction to them. You know, if I have an immediate reaction to something, good or bad, I try to hone in on that. You know, if I'm indifferent, or, you know, I don't have a strong reaction to a piece, then cool, it's probably, you know, it's probably not for me. But if it's a strong reaction, good, I kind of focus in on that. And through buying and being a collector, you know, that's a real cue that I've learned to recognise over time, and, you know, with experience. And some, you know, there have been times when I've seen pieces of art that are, you know, hugely powerful and have had definitely had a reaction to it, but you know, because of the subject matter would be, you know, quite dark or quite, you know, so it's not oh, I've got a reaction, therefore I would buy it, therefore I would collect it. So it's you know, I find that an interesting thing, you know, seeing something powerful, if it's dark, you know, and my willingness to buy a piece that is dark and has a dark message, you know, that's maybe that's, you know, I've been collecting since 2006, so yeah, 15 years, but I'm still there. I wouldn't say there are a lot of dark pieces in my collection with a dark message that are obviously, you know, but that I still love the experience of seeing something like that, you know, and so yeah.
Do you think that the art movement of street art, would that be seen as impressionism in 50 to 100 years time? I mean, is it that strong as an art movement?
Yeah, that question of when, you know, how are we going to know what comes after contemporary art? You know, that's a really big question that I kind of don't have the answer for. Maybe it will be viewed as, because it's a departure from contemporary art. It's often a different medium. It's often different paint style, tools. So what is the aesthetic compared to, you know, abstract expression, especially the end of abstract expressionism and the start of pop art was a kind of very fairly defined time and short period of time where that finished and that started. And I don't actually have enough knowledge around that to say, well, it was called abstract expressionism at the time and therefore then became, you know, how those names, maybe those names have arrived later on. So yeah,
but
time will tell. You know, yeah, time will tell. We'll have to, you know. But then people have been graffitiing. You know, the godfathers of graffiti, Basquiat, you know, Richard Hambleton, Keith Haring. You know, these guys have, you know, were doing it in the, you know, late 80s. So, you know, we are 40 years into. You know, into it. So
true. And Basquiat, I mean, that is comparable with.
Yeah, well, he certainly started there. He has his roots. Obviously, you know, his practice moved into, you know, the studio, but that was his. You know, he saw a space. And I suppose, you know, maybe when you're, you know, I'm not an artist myself, but, you know, if you're young and don't have huge means to set up a studio, buy materials and things like that, you know, you see the quickest, easiest way and spaces to use, and, you know, you want to express yourself, and you want people to see it. So publicly is obviously you get the numbers, you get the exposure. Obviously, there's that line of legality.
But also maybe you didn't have the studio, you didn't afford the canvases or whatever. So for some of them at least in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And and becoming the early and without the internet, without the system, the system that they were in, the contemporary art gallery system at that time, they found support, notoriety, and were then adopted into that. But yeah, they're definitely the godfathers to what we see now and what we see today. But there's obviously been a disruption of Banksy chooses to manage himself. He doesn't have gallery representation. He wants control himself. He wants anonymity. So it's a.
Have you ever met him?
No, not to my knowledge. But maybe I've been somewhere where
he's been around.
Where he's been, and so. But so I can't say that I have.
A few have followed the art market as closely as you have, actually. When it comes to street art and urban art, but what is the trend right now, would you say?
The trend within urban art.
Is there a trend, or is it?
I think obviously there's a lot of interest, and some of it is definitely driven by the money side of it, which is its own thing. I don't necessarily think I think it's good because it's becoming more mainstream, more widely viewed, accepted.
Put more focus in general.
Yeah, exactly. But but then movements that start underground, and whether it's hip hop, fashion, trends that start small, grow, become become mainstream. Do they then lose some of their cool factor or their do they sell out to corporates? Do they and there's definitely there is definitely an appropriation of street art aesthetic by corporates because they want to align themselves with the cool aesthetic look. They want to speak to young They obviously want to speak to young customers as well, and how youngsters, I think less. Millennials and youngsters just before, they're not in. The ownership of things is. I say it's less important because I shouldn't speak to what is and isn't important. I think ownership is more difficult for them because of the the financial situations that they've lived through. Like whether it's buying houses or buying expensive art. So yeah, I would say the trend is to become more mainstream, to become more widely viewable. Inevitably, with higher, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Banksy, whether it's whatever, whatever the next thing is, whatever the fastest growing asset, or even to call it an asset, fastest growing thing at that time, attracts attention. Attracts, there's a little bit of a herd mentality of money coming into that area, good for good or bad reasons, and people tend to rush to get into something, and if they don't if it's not well thought out, measured, obviously human reactions can be overreactions, and
But who is the typical collector of street and urban art?
Are
there a typical collector?
Typical collectors, I would say. I think certainly from like 2003 to sort of 2000, early 2000s, I would say that there were a lot of creatives, kind of like people within advertising, music, and whether it was artists themselves. That a lot of the people that I speak to who are and people geographically, in Bristol, there's a real scene there. Those people tended to be the traditional buyers and owners of it. And as it's evolved over time, you know, at that time, 2006, I wasn't in the art world. I was working in finance. You know, my collecting started through buying a house and decorating the house with pictures, and then that grew into a passion and and building a collection. You know, I'm an example of it. I worked in finance. I ended up coming to street art. You know, I was definitely seeing it in and around London. You know, I became aware of Banksy via his book. I saw it on someone's bookshelf. That was my introduction to it. Now, you know, we're fast forward 15 years. Who's buying it now? You know, I see a real cross section of clients. You know, but there's still a cross section of prices. You know, you can still very much find accessible work for, you know, not a lot of money that is, you know, interesting to you. You know, produced. You know, people have put you know, love, time, and energy into that. So I think, you know, I don't see one particular set of people buying it. I think as you go into higher prices, well, you know, obviously it's people with more disposable income to put into it, and whatever their motivation, whether it's buying for love, buying for to decorate, buying to invest. You know, everyone comes to all parts of it with, you know, with different motivations. So yeah, I don't see. I don't really. I see a broad spectrum of people actually. I don't really see a real trend of like it's these people. I think more legacy owners were I would say they're from the creative industries because you know, yeah, they were, you know.
They quickly understood it, I guess.
Certainly in England, I mean, graffiti's obviously been everywhere, but I see the main areas where it kind of grew and exploded, certainly into the urban scape, Bristol, London. I would say that, you know, those are the two big ones. Obviously there are you know, there are other ones, but those are the those are the two places.
But and I mean, we mentioned Banksy, we mentioned Keith Haring, etc. But who would you say is the godfather of graffiti street art?
Godfather of graffiti. Well, Banksy credits Blek Larat of introducing him to stencil art, and I'm not sure on the dates of kind of his beginning of it. I think before graffiti in its, you know, in its earliest forms, I think, you know, obviously, I think my understanding, and it's not, you know, my graffiti history is not fully complete, but there was, with the birth of kind of like rap and hip hop, there were you know, well, the first iteration of lots of graffiti was on New York subway trains. So they, you know, people wanted to tag themselves on it. It moved around the city. People saw it. They wanted to, you know, and they weren't just simple tags. Obviously, they needed to be seen at distance. So they painted, you know, the whole side of, you know, these cars. Sometimes the entire train. So yeah, for me, I think it was kind of, that was where it was born. I don't know enough of the real pioneers and godfathers, you know, people like Scene, you know, Cope 2, Blade, you know, these kind of, you know, those older guys who some of which have gone on to, you know, have, you know, there are a subset of street artists, and by this choice, they kind of differentiate themselves. People who just want to paint on the street, they don't want to engage in interior canvas work. They, you know, they want their work to be only seen on the street, and they don't want to be seen to be commercial. So
the true urban art in one way.
Yeah. Blue would be the Italian artist. Blue would be an example of that. He's actually, you know, gone and, you know, in certain instances gone to destroy murals that he's placed himself, and he's, you know, is totally unprolific in his in his interior work. and obviously there then becomes a scarcity thing, which actually conversely maybe makes it that much more appealing and sticks. Another example of someone who has not mass produced prints. I think his total edition count is about 450 prints, which is obviously a very small amount, but it's had the short supply has meant that prices have accelerated, and it's scarce, and so yeah, they're relatively hard to come by, and certainly aren't available cheaply. So, but yeah.
But how does the street art differ from? I mean, you said Bristol and London is kind of the key cities
for England.
here.
I mean, obviously,
exactly.
all the big urban centres around the world. I think where there's a concentration of people. I mean, is that a function of take 1,000 people and you'll have 10 graffiti artists? So wherever you're in that urban landscape, wherever there are walls, wherever is it born at but often, it can be born out of frustration, dissent, a willingness to, to want your voice to be heard. Yeah. If there's, is graffiti? Strangely, that's before graffiti might have, signified a rundown area and somewhere where, opportunities weren't great, it wasn't a lot of investment, lower property prices. Now, not to say that exactly the same type of graffiti, but there is a you've actually got councils, Croydon's a good example of a place that has kind of embraced wanting to bring artists in, make wall space available to them and do it in a way that then brightens the urban landscape. In Miami, Wynwood is a kind of similar district where, and then what happens is it becomes a nicer place to live. New businesses come in. The price of a cup of coffee doubles, triples, and so it's strange. It's strange, and it's a different thing. Equally, it isn't exactly the same thing. Random tags everywhere. Again, it's that question of well, there is obviously a line where graffiti becomes. When does graffiti become art? What is that a price point? Is that a technical level ability? Is it? Yeah.
But would you say that now a younger generation is out there on the streets painting, obviously, but would you say the message changed as well, or is it still the same message?
Tough question. Yeah, I think. What do I see? What do I see now? And have I seen? I'm trying to think what I see now and what I've seen in the past.
Is it more politically? Is it more like the sustainability aspect? Is that
I think
communication?
I think people. Even if you just ask yourself this question, what's happening on the streets? Well, what's happening on the streets now? Well, we've Extinction Rebellion. We've got Banksy doing a piece to support them, or to give them a kind of not more of a voice, but just to acknowledge them. And we now have people locking themselves to the street and looking to disrupt, whether it's the traffic, but they're looking to disrupt. They're looking to to have their voice heard. So. Was it less political than before? I'm sure people. I wasn't around to see a lot of when in the 80s. I was born in '76. So I was 4 or 5. So my I suppose people of all wherever they feel, especially young people, wherever they feel their voice is not being heard, whether they paint on a wall, whether they chain themselves to some railings, whether they march, whether they there's a need for them to feel heard, and this is one way that they can do that. Equally, there are the artists there who just want to express themselves, I don't even necessarily think it's there will undoubtedly be some who want to be. I'm not an artist myself again, so do you want to be famous? Do you want to be known, or do you want people to see your work? Do you want them to engage with it? I would like to think less people think about being famous, but more people want people to see their art. They want to get their message out there.
Yeah.
So,
but are you afraid that the high prices and speculative market will destroy the beauty of it?
Well, with higher prices, it becomes more exclusive to lower people. Obviously, there are ephemeral pieces by artists that, as the price of their gallery work and certificated works, you can still buy and own stuff by them. But in a way, the good thing about street art and urban art, it is put out there on a level for free for people to interact with it, whether they want to go and visit it, take a picture of it, look at it on a screen. They get to see it. So even if they don't, and again, those maybe younger people don't come to it with a view of I'd love to own it, or if they did, are they happy to own the image? Are they happy to print the image out? Does it if you don't have the option of owning a piece that is certificated and an original piece, can you get I think you can get quite a large portion of the enjoyment of seeing and living with that piece by, and I'm not I'm definitely not advocating copyright theft or the theft of intellectual property, but it's I think Banksy has issued his images for people's public private use and said and said please enjoy this, but don't set up a shop selling T-shirts or posters. That's the so.
But I think an interesting aspect is also that he still sell his prints for quite low sum of money.
Yeah, it's
meanwhile
at times
secondary market.
He wants to make his art accessible. Definitely, in some respects. Not all of his not all of his prints are sold in that way. Traditionally before they were, but over time it's now evolving into, portions are sold in, whether it's via lotteries, whether whatever way. But there is a there is a mechanism of him dealing with higher end work with two higher end clients, and obviously without a gallery, he has to manage that himself, or via pest control, via gross domestic product. His recent show in Croydon. There's. It would be very easy for him to price stuff very high and sell it to to who he wants to, and the fact that he doesn't do that when he can, there's an intent there that some of the artwork is owned outside of people who just people who can afford it. But a secondary market for an artist is its own living thing that some of them have a tougher relationship with than others, but obviously the level of it in relation to your primary prices can sometimes be a help or a hindrance. So
you're obviously on Tate Ward, which is one of the major, one of the auction houses that has major sales of street art and urban art.
Sure.
But there is another painting coming up for auction now.
Sure.
On Sotheby's, the Banksy, the shredded one.
Yeah.
Love in the Bin. It will be sold with an estimate on £4 to £6 million. I think it's about 4 times or 6 times the estimate that it was.
I think it sold for just over $1 million last time, so it's certainly 3 to 3.5 times at the low estimate. Yeah.
Do you find the estimate accurate according to you?
Well, in relation to some of the larger paintings that have been sold, not necessarily larger, larger in price point and not necessarily specifically dimensions, but with Monkey Parliament selling for, or Devolve Parliament selling for nigh on £10 million. Game Changer, admittedly, it was there was a charity element to that. I think 16 million, and the Love Is in the Air thrower that got sold. I think that was about $13 million. You know, in relation to those pieces, I don't think it's an unreasonable estimate. And I think estimates at the larger houses need to be attractive, and they want they want the estimate to build energy. You know, they want competition from from that point. You know, I would say, you know, that Love Is in the Bin as a piece of conceptual art is probably, you know, one of his best works. It obviously features an image that is you know, well loved. So yeah, you know, I think it will sell well. It could sell very well. You know, there's the auction business is you know, it can be sometimes it can be a little bit fickle, and you know, there's obviously lots of moving parts to it. But you know, Sotheby's have a rich history and a long history of knowing, you know, what will sell things for high prices. So I think I find it a little bit interesting that it's come back to the market as quick as it has. You know, I would say 3 years is not long. I don't know a lot about the people who bought it, you know, before, and even if they are trebling their money, I don't know. Yeah, you know, well, that, you know, I'm not party to what they have in their collection, what they want to buy, you know, what they're looking to buy, and you know, these, you know, sometimes you have to make hard decisions as a collector. That, but you know, I could see this being one of his most you know, revered pieces in 10, 20 years, and you know, I'm sure we'll look back at the result and say, well, you know. So
can we be sure that Banksy won't shred the other half of the painting after the fall, the 14th of October?
I mean, I suppose who knows, but yeah, I mean, you know, we could still be in the second part of it. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that story, the story that it should have been shredded completely would have made it a bit of a different, obviously, well, not even a bit of a different, a very different result. Would the piece still, if his intention was for it to completely destroy, then, you know, there's that then becomes a that becomes a different piece altogether, doesn't it? You know, is that then punishing the person who consigned it for putting it to auction? You know, is that him saying, I don't want my work at auction, or you can't do that to me, you know, you can't do that to me, or I won't allow you to do that to me. So who knows? I mean, there will certainly be a lot of eyes on that moment, and you know, knowing the man, will it just sell? Will the hammer come down? Who knows? You know, maybe, or certainly around that time. You know, he likes to you know, him and his team, you know, a manipulator of the media, and certainly he likes to focus attention in places, and you know, maybe there'll be who knows, we'll have to see. I won't be completely surprised, or maybe I will be completely surprised if it just sells and nothing happens. You know, for an artist to have that much attention on a particular piece, a particular place, I would say it would be a little bit of a lost opportunity if you didn't do something with that. But yeah, let's wait and see.
After seeing Danny Herbert at Tate Ward, I met Alex Bransick, Senior Director and Head of Contemporary Art in Europe. As we enter one of Sotheby's showrooms, Alex's team fixes what is needed to best expose the painting to the audience that is expected before the sale on October 14th. So can you take us back in time? What actually happened 3 years ago?
Well, it was the last lot of the October evening sale in London, and a Banksy, Girl with Balloon, was the last lot, priced at £300,000 to £500,000, I think, from memory. And my colleague Oliver Barker was the auctioneer. I was on the phones. I was actually bidding on the lot, or trying to bid on the lot with one of my clients. And it sold well and sold, for £1 million, including fees. And literally as Ollie brought down the hammer and pronounced that it was sold, an alarm went off. And the painting, which was hanging at the back of the sale room in plain sight of everybody, shred. To much consternation and amusement of the audience.
Yeah.
And I think even I at that point, I knew what had happened. I laughed to myself. I knew what had happened. It wasn't completely, the jump to realise that this was Banksy and this is what he'd done.
Yeah.
Everything played out very quickly in my head because the whole consignment process up until that point, there had been several things that had happened which were unusual.
Yeah. Okay.
And suddenly they all made sense.
Okay.
So it was clear to me what had happened. And I think I chuckled, and I think I took it in the spirit of the way that it was intended by the artist.
Yeah. But what about? Did people start to turn around to see if he was in the audience, or was everyone so focused on the painting, or?
So because it was at the back of the room, I was on a telephone banks next to the auctioneer. I was probably furthest away from it of everybody. And everybody in that area, you could hear the hubbub, the alarm was going off, everyone was looking around, iPhones came out. Banksy had some people in the audience who then were also recording it and filming it live, unbeknownst to us at the time. And it's, looking back on it now, it's quite hilarious for me to watch because there's a number of my colleagues reacting, as you do in the situation on the hoof. But it's, it was brilliantly staged. And nobody would believe that we were not involved, but it was brilliantly staged.
And how did the buyer react to what happened?
So it was complicated because, and actually not just for the buyer, but for us as an auction house as well, because, in an auction, the fall of the hammer is a legal agreement, right? It's the signature on the contract. And we have standard terms for buyers and sellers. None of those standard terms consider a situation in which the article, the object which is promoted and described in the catalogue is different to the one that you actually buy. So it caused a bit of a headache for our lawyers. The press went crazy. Certainly the press call at the end of the evening was much busier than your average press call. All the journalists made sure they stuck around and listened to what was going on. I remember we went out that night, as we often do after a sale, to celebrate, and I woke up the next morning having celebrated the night before, and there was this quite sort of febrile atmosphere anyway because of this thing that had happened. Everybody was a little bit overexcited. Looked at my phone and no joke, my inbox was just interview requests from the world of media, every single one, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. I'd never seen anything like it. The Sun newspaper had got hold of my mobile number and were just ringing me off the hook trying to get a quote. So it was very clear very quickly that this had become like an overnight sensation. This was not just a funny event that happened in Sotheby's sale room. This was huge. And, the next week was really spent giving the buyer, or the winning bidder, should I say, the space that she needed in order to make the decision to complete the purchase. Because she didn't have to. The work that was, that she could now buy and take home with her is not the one that she bid on. And we had crazies as well. I think Banksy always elicits a crazy response from people, but there was a fair few crazies around the situation. People making offers to buy the work outright, recognising that it's worth more now than it was before. I had very quickly people writing all sorts of, MA master's dissertations on the subject. We had underbidders who weren't successful trying to use our terms for buyers and sellers against us, because they would have wanted to bid on had they known that this was about to happen.
Yeah.
And assume, and they were accusing us of knowing that this was about to happen, which obviously we didn't. But in the end, it took about a week, but the winning bidder did decide to complete the purchase. And we put the work back on view in our London galleries because we'd had such an overwhelming response from people who wanted to see the work. And it was a terrible, terrible weather that weekend. It was pouring with rain. And we literally had queues around the block of people coming to see the work. There's one guy who'd flown in from Ohio just for the day to see it. It was incredible. And, I think it's, when you realise that, the sort of the importance that people attach to it, the cultural importance people attach to it, very quickly it became clear that this was, a real sensation. It's a painting which people will queue up in the rain to go and see. And they're very, in this day and age of image saturation and, mobile devices and people looking at art online, that's a really powerful thing to have artwork like that.
So how much of the value is caused by the tremendous attention this painting has gained the last few years, when you're now selling it for £4 to £6 million?
So, look, it's an interesting question. I think there's no doubt that the performance, that happened in our sale room has coincided, or at least sparked, a kind of a massive boom in interest in Banksy's work. His own Instagram following doubled over that weekend. Mine went like 10x. But that's because I didn't have very many to begin with. But the point is, I think it was the catalyst that starts to saw like prices really rise for his work. When we sold it, it made £1 million. That was a record for the artist if you exclude a charity piece that he'd done with Damien Hirst. A year later, we sold the Devolved Parliament, which was the large painting of monkeys in Westminster, which made £10 million, almost. So in the space of that year, price went up. Since then, a charity piece that he did for the NHS sold for £16 million in excess of. So there has been, over the last it's 3 years ago that this happened, and over that period, there's been a massive escalation in prices for Banksy's work. And I think this is really that event was the catalyst of it. But there are more people bidding, and I think all of the top 10 prices for Banksy have been achieved in that period of time.
Yeah. But can Banksy do anything today, any turns in the gold? I mean, is it like that? The prices are on that level now, or would you think it continue?
Look, I think he is now collected alongside the greats of 20th, 21st century artists. So you're as likely to find a Banksy in a major post-war collection as you are in a collection dedicated to street art. There are still, there's still a very dedicated collector base who also look at other street art. But I think the people driving the prices and paying the top prices for his work, they're some of the best art collectors in the world, and they're buying Banksy. I mean, in October 2018, 2019, Banksy eclipsed Basquiat in one of our sales. I mean, to me, that was mind-blowing. That I started with the Basquiat as the top lot of the sale, but the Banksy made more. I think it's truly global. I think there's, we see huge demand from every corner of the world, Asia in particular. I think there's a newer generation of collectors today as well who are much more conversant with cryptocurrency and NFTs, and I think Banksy also appeals to that segment of the market. When we sold Love Is in the Air in New York earlier this year, 3 of the 4 top bidders were all bidding. It was the first time that one could pay with cryptocurrency in a major auction. and 3 of the top 4 bidders were elected to pay with crypto, had they been successful. In the end, it was bought by a cash buyer. But it was interesting to see, 75% of the bidders electing to pay with crypto.
I can imagine it's a difference for the auction market as a whole, but also for you as an auctioneer, I guess. But this is quite new. I mean, this is the season, isn't it? Since you started with NFTs and cryptocurrency.
This year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll put my hand up. This time last year, I didn't know what an NFT was.
No.
We're now, we're now selling tens of millions of dollars of them each season.
Do you know more?
I do know more, and it's one of the young guys on my team here in London who first came to me and said, we should be selling these. And I said, what is it? And he told me, and I said, really, what is it? And he's now running, he's running an NFT department, and it's, incredibly profitable. It's bringing in a new layer of clients to Sotheby's, and I think we have to get with it. I think it's, this is at least as valid as the physical artworks that we've been selling for centuries.
Do you think this piece of art is relevant to future generation? And if so, I mean, why?
I do. I do, because I think it is probably the most recognisable image of the 21st century to date. Banksy has incredible popular appeal, as well as with major collectors, but massive popular appeal as well. I do think it's part of art history. I think it is. I see it as a great piece of performance art. Pulled off, staged. In the sort of the stronghold at the centre of the art market, something which you shouldn't be able to pull off, but he did. And Sotheby's isn't the only one, right? He's put up a Tesco's value soup can in MoMA. He's put things in the British Museum, in Tate. He's managed it. So it's not just Sotheby's that's been fallen victim to this. It's the great art institutions of our time. Most of them have been targeted by Banksy. So yes, I do. I think on many levels. I think on an art historical level, it will be relevant. I think in terms of the artworks that the next generation of collectors, people always. My view is that when people are successful enough, wealthy enough to be able to acquire art, they look back at the artists from their youth. Same with music as well. Yeah. And I think there's a crop of aspiring collectors today who, when they do find their own success and do find wealth and do start their own collections, Banksy is the one they'll remember and they'll be looking to acquire.
Is it true that someone went home after Sotheby's sale 3 years ago and shredded his own Banksy to make it more valuable?
I haven't heard that. I've heard lots, as I told you, there were lots of crazies, but no, I haven't heard that.
No.
No.
So it's not that we all should go home and shred our Banksys.
No.
But how can we know that Banksy won't shred the rest of the painting after it might be hammered for £6 million?
So we were not aware that there was a shredder in it last time. We are this time. And more to the point, I'm aware that there are no batteries in it this time.
Okay. So it's exciting to see whether you're right or not.
It would be a miracle if he were able to do it.
Yeah. Then the value will increase even more, I guess.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.